Because I had been a police officer or wanted to be a police officer, if I couldn't be a police officer, I wanted to be the very best dispatcher for them that I could be.
Welcome to the Living Mission First podcast, where we share real stories of real hope for first responders. I'm the host, Jeremy Wade, the Executive Director of Mission First Alliance. Today, I'm excited to be joined with Marcus Allred, our Alliance Coordinator for Mission First Alliance, who also has a background in law enforcement and dispatching. Do you mind if I just open in prayer?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Dear Lord, just thank you for this time. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for all that you've done in and through the life of Marcus and his family. And I'm just excited for this conversation of real hope for first responders. And I pray that it reaches those that are out on the front line serving and sacrificing day in and day out, and others that have a heart for them. Be with us today in this conversation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to others being able to hear this.
Start by sharing some of your stories, some of your background, and I guess even some of your upbringing really gave you that heart for being a first responder, for law enforcement, and then share kind of where God started to redirect.
Yeah, I grew up on the mission field from basically infancy, and that was just life. I didn't know any different halfway around the world growing up there. So we grew up in a home that was a Christian home, of course, and learned about the Lord all my life, growing up as a kid. And because you're in that, at some point as a young child, you hear about you needing to be saved, and you hear about sin. And so at some point in my life, early on, about 6, 7 years old, I knew that I needed to be saved. And so as a child, I accepted the gospel. I accepted that. And it was just kind of just growing up and doing the church thing. And I don't ever remember, and I would just say this out loud in the context of my whole story of my life, I don't remember there ever being a time where God and Jesus and the Bible and church didn't matter. But and I mean that in the depths of me. In my actions, those kind of have been all over the place, though, like for a lot of people. And so if you were to go back and look at some of the outward actions, you would say, wow, you could question whether I had ever been saved. But I don't question that at that point in my life now looking back. But there were certainly opportunities to question that. How in the world did I end up in law enforcement or this arena of the first responder world? That actually is kind of a funny start. And this is kind of speaks to the context of how God has a sense of humor and how he will use just the weird things in your life. So the start really was I was graduating high school. I was a homeschooler, terrible at math. And it was kind of back in the day when there was almost this expectation like, hey, you graduate high school, you should go to college. And I don't know that my parents necessarily pressured us on that. It was back in that day. It was like, you just go to college. So I was like, okay, fine, I'm supposed to go to college. But I hated math. So I was handed a college catalog, and first thing I did was, okay, what do I want to be when I grow up? And that was based on what major could I find that had the least amount of math. Yeah. And so I came across criminal justice, and I had always liked watching detective shows and things about police, and I had a great uncle who during that most of my life was a deputy sheriff. He was in the States, of course, so I wasn't around him a lot, but I appreciated the role that he did. I just always had an appreciation for that role. But I never sat around. I was not the 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid who's like, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer. That's just not what I did. I was not one of those. And so it's funny looking back because I chose criminal justice because it had one math. And of course, it looked interesting too. All the courses, all the criminal justice courses, all law enforcement related stuff, there was an interest in that. And so I thought, okay, I'll do this. And maybe I'll be a police officer. And I honestly thought like someday maybe I could be a detective. I thought like that would be cool. So that kind of started my trajectory of how I got into this, not your normal way of getting into it. And so I pursued my 4-year college degree and got my bachelor's. And again, the natural course was, okay, I've done this now. I should go figure out how to get a job as a police officer. So I ended up in Michigan trying to apply to some agencies up there. This was in 1995. And back then, it was very hard up north to get a police job. You'd have 30 positions and 300 people kind of apply, that kind of scenario. And so everywhere that I applied and tested, I didn't make it. And so the Lord at that time had me doing construction, which was fine. I was trying to put food on the table and pay bills like you're supposed to do. But it just didn't work. And I ended up back in North Carolina, which is where I was originally from. I was born in North Carolina in Winston-Salem. And I ended up volunteering at the Winston-Salem Police Department because I thought, well, I'll try here at home and see if I can get in here. And so I just thought I had some time, and I thought, well, rather than just apply right away, let me see if I can volunteer and see if I like this agency. And so they allowed me to come in as a volunteer. I volunteered in the domestic violence unit, and I very quickly discovered that I liked the people that were there. I liked the organization. And so the next natural step was, okay, I think I'm going to apply for their rookie school because Winston-Salem had their own academy. I didn't have to go to one of the state academies. They had their own. And they were one of the top rated ones in the state too, because they actually exceeded the state standards. So I thought, well, this is cool. I'll get some really good training. And so I was accepted, and I went through rookie school, and again, sights set on I'm going to be a police officer. Lord willing, maybe someday I can be a detective. I can reach that goal. Well, it didn't quite work out that way exactly. I ended up getting released on the street to my own beat, and it's kind of funny because I know they do this in a lot of places. You're the rookie, they give you the worst beat, right? And so the idea is you get out there and you really get tried. And so I got released. This was like at the beginning of a summer, and as we all know, summertime, when things heat up.
Yeah. And
so I was thinking, okay, well, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen. But at that same time, my dad, who was still in the mission field, my mom and dad were still in the mission field, he needed to come to the States for an emergency back surgery. And I knew that he was going to need some help. And so I was like, well, what do I do? Because I was the one son that could free myself up and go back to Saipan, which is where they were at, and help him out. So I was looking at the logistics of that. Started trying to work with the agency. Could I step out and still come back? And how long of that period could that be? And they basically told me if I was back within a year, I would not have to repeat and go through everything again. So I left and decided to go help them, and also to help fulfill a couple of teaching positions at a Christian school, and they were missing a couple positions, a Bible teacher and a PE teacher. And I knew that I could fill those roles for them, plus be there to help my dad. So I said, okay, fine, I'll set it aside. It was during that year that the Lord would start to change things in terms of whether I was going to be allowed to continue to pursue life as a police officer when I got back. While I was there, it was discovered that I had some issues with my eyes. When I left, the eye doctor there said, look, when you go back to the States, you need to get a second opinion. And so I did. I came back fully expecting in my mind, I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go back and be a police officer. I'm going to continue doing what I've been thinking I'm going to do for my life. So I came back. I went to a doctor here in the U.S. and related to my retinas, and the doctor would not clear me to go back to be a police officer, which all of a sudden created a crisis, another crisis. I haven't even mentioned the other crises that go along with all this. We can get into the similar to that later. But so I ended up not being able to go back and be a police officer. And I just didn't know what to do. The city said, well, would you be interested in doing dispatching? I'm like, well, I know what dispatchers are, but that's not what I've trained to do, but I need a job. And I love this. One, I love the agency, love the people I worked with, and I wanted to be around it still. My heart was there for that. So I ultimately did end up spending the bulk of my time in dispatch. Total time the Lord gave me with Winston was 10 and a half years. And nine of those were spent in doing police and fire dispatching and doing the 911 stuff. And that turned out to be way harder than I ever imagined it would be for multiple reasons, issues that even people are dealing with today. One of those being the short-staffed setup that you work with. So they're basically overworking you. Your stress levels stay through the roof, partly because of that, partly because of the job itself. And so I stayed there for 9 years. And in 2010, I hit a crisis, another major crisis moment. It had been building, and it came at the cost, sadly, of one of the lives of one of our sergeants. I was working the radio that morning, and there was a panic alarm actually that came in from a business, and it ended up being a scenario where a known domestic violence offender had gone to this business with the intent of harming or killing his girlfriend or wife. I can't remember what the relationship was, and ended up turning out tragic. 2 officers were shot before they were able to finally take down the suspect. It was at that point, because of everything building. And I'd always said because I had been a police officer or wanted to be a police officer, if I couldn't be a police officer, I wanted to be the very best dispatcher for them that I could be. That it was my goal to provide them, because I knew, just from my training and even the short amount of time I was out there, you go to certain calls and what's going on at the call, where a lot of the dispatchers I worked with had never been on the street. They couldn't visualize what was happening at the traffic stop. They couldn't visualize what's happening when you go in the door of that house and you have to take control of the situation in there. They can't visualize walking into an alarm call on midnight shift into a dark place to clear the building. And maybe you're doing it by yourself, and maybe you have backup with you. And I could visualize all that. So sitting there, that made the world difference to me, because I felt like I could give back more to the people that I once worked with, even though it was a short amount of time that I once worked with. I could give back to them. I could help them. I could think ahead of what would they need. What will they need next? So all of that deeply mattered to me, making sure they could get home safely after their shift, to go home to their families. All of that mattered to me. And so that one thing that was a greatest strength for me also ended up being the thing that hurt me the most, though, because I did not ever want to be on the channel and lose somebody. I didn't want nobody to get hurt. I definitely didn't want to lose anybody. And so during that time, we lost one sergeant. I was not working that shift, but it still hit hard. I didn't know either one of these sergeants like really closely, but it didn't matter. I knew of them, but the fact that they were part of our blue family mattered. And yes, there were absolutely ones that I knew well. And sadly, even in the middle of all that, one of the guys that graduated with me was on his way. It was just a weekend that right before he was supposed to deploy. It was back there in post 9/11, where a lot of police officers were also signing up to go fight for the country too. And this was a guy who was just a great guy that was in my rookie school class. And he and I were constantly vying for like the top grade in the class, just kind of fun of seeing who's going to graduate number one, not like that. And he was just a super guy. And he was on his way getting ready to be deployed. Like on that one weekend right before, he told his wife, he said, I'm going to take the motorcycle out for one more ride. He never made it back home. And wife, two young daughters. And just those things just really hit hard. And so being on the radio and actually that day, it crushed me. It was more weight than I could bear at that point. And it ended up, after that happened, things didn't get better. They got worse for me, to the point where I realized I was not in a safe place. And because I was no longer in a safe place, I also couldn't keep safe the people that I loved. So I was at a major crisis point of, okay, Lord, what's next? Where do I go? Where do I go from here? What do I do? This is all I thought I was going to do for my life. So what can I do? And the Lord opened up the door and allowed me to then move into the software space for public safety, working for a company to be able that created the software that we used as dispatchers, the mobile software that our officers were using. Had the joy of 5.5 years, and when I use the word joy, it really was a joy. 5.5 years traveling the country, training police officers and dispatchers and some firefighters how to use this software and records, some cases records personnel, and just meeting hundreds of police officers and dispatchers across the country. That was so fun. Frustrating at times, because a bunch of knuckleheads, right? They're forced to come to a class they don't want to go to during a time where they're changing software and they don't want to, because we all hug our old stuff, and as much as we hate it, we still hug it and hold on to it tightly. And so I get to be the guy who walks in and be like, hey, I'm here to show you something new that I think you're going to like. And they're like, well, we don't really want to be here. And I've been up all night, and they made me come, right? But I just had, even amidst that, I had so much fun. It was meeting them and just being with them, and and knowing that God was giving me a safe place to still support our first responders. Like, that was a gift from him.
Yeah. You've been through a lot of twists and turns, and I know that there'll be other first responders that can relate with that too, because I think that there's a lot of times that we go in with our kind of vision for how things are going to go and our dreams. I know I had that in my career as well. These are my goals and these are my aspirations, and this is how I thought it was going to go and what I expected. And many times it doesn't go the way that we thought and we had expected, and can really be crisis points, crisis of identity, crisis of what's next, where we go from here. Maybe someone's being medically retired. Or just the accumulation of it all. I have great respect for dispatchers and the job they do, and I greatly appreciated in the Seattle Police Department allowing us, when I was first a police officer, to spend a full day in our 911 call center and our dispatch center. And I very quickly realized that is a tough job, one of which I don't know that I could do. And then hearing your story of starting in law enforcement and understanding the job and being able to relate and connect with it, and having great respect and support and being able to acknowledge, there's a lot that goes into that. How was that in terms of an accumulation on you? You talked about some of the big calls, and there's big calls, there's little calls, like it's day in and day out. How did that job impact you, impact your family?
So I went into dispatch. I was in training when 9/11 happened. That was 2001. I wasn't even released yet. I found, for me personally, and this could be different for different people, but I thought learning to be a dispatcher would be easy because of all the background I already had in criminal justice degree, that knowledge base, having gone through rookie school, having been on the street for a short time, having gone through the FTO program and responding to some calls myself. Again, I went in there kind of thinking that, and I found out everything I had been through up to that point, including being pepper sprayed, was way easier than learning to be a dispatcher. Where when you're out on the street, like you were, I'm responsible as far as backing up other officers, and I'm responsible for doing tasks and responding to calls and writing reports and all the things that go with that. But I'm responsible for what I'm doing right now. And then I went into dispatch, and all of a sudden I'm responsible for 15 people, 30 people, 50 people, some nights 100 people. And you're sitting there going, I got to keep all these people safe. They're all my responsibility. If you can't handle it, you get out of the kitchen, kind of thing. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. But it truly was the hardest job that I ever trained for. And And because, again, I bore the responsibility, maybe in a way maybe I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it because I really did care about police officers and the firefighters that I was responsible for. Obviously, I eventually got released, and I worked my way up to training others because I actually love to train people. I enjoy training, and so it became one of my joys, and I was known in our comm center as, hey, look, if nobody else wants to train, give them to Marcus. Or if that person's really hard to train, give him to Marcus. He's like, I had people come to me like, man, you must be like Job because you have so much patience with these people. I'm like, well, people had to be patient with me. It took me a while to get to the place where I could get released because this was a really hard job to learn to do. All the multitasking that had to take place, being that place of resources where whether the person's calling in the police department because they're just looking for a certain resource in the city, because we had to take all the non-emergency calls that came in, forget just 911, and then realizing that in the 911 world too, vast majority of what comes in there are not emergencies. People just don't know the non-emergency number, or they're just belligerent and they're going to just call 911 just because. And then you deal with the frustration of your city won't let you tell people they can't use 911 for that purpose. And so you deal with that kind of stuff every day. And then the Lord allowed me to grow in that role, eventually become a senior operator, where I became the primary trainer for my squad. That also enabled me to be supervisor over my squad during that time. So the Lord was building responsibility into me and leadership into me in very difficult situations. I was offered to become a supervisor over a squad multiple times. My director came to me, would you consider it? And I just turned it down. I enjoy training people. I enjoy leading within a team. I hate the leadership spot. Like, I've just never cherished that spot. I don't want it. Let somebody else have it. Plus, I just watched the way that supervisors were treated, the politics around that. Not much more pay, more responsibility. They just weren't treated very well. I'm like, why would I want that? I can hang out here and still hang out with my people. So I went through having the opportunity, even that time, to go from all the levels, but also to supervise. And then occasionally, if supervisor and director was gone, I had to fill that role. So I was blessed to have all that, but that came with a cost. All that came with a cost because it was all on you. Just like you would be out in the field, you're out in the field and your supervision, it's going to fall on you at some point. So I'm glad I got that, but it really did take its toll on me. And you're right. You don't know what you're from one moment to the next as a dispatcher, what you're going to get into. I mean, the classic scenario is you answer one phone call and it's the dog barking call. Great, the dog's barking. And then right behind that, you pick up the call and somebody is telling you, I think I just killed my girlfriend. And now you're like, okay. And then you've got to manage the fact that this guy is sitting here telling you that he just choked out this woman who has 2 children who are in another room that don't know their mother's dead. And now you have to sit there and like, okay, I've got to try to keep this guy on the phone. I don't know what he's getting ready to do. Are these children going to be safe? So now you're getting your units rolling. They're running code because we don't know what this guy's getting ready to do. And so now you're bearing the weight of responsibility of, I need to keep this guy on the phone. I need to find out if he's armed, is he planning on hurting himself, these children? Does he have any weapons? Because now I got to make sure my officers that get there are going to be safe. The medics are going to be responding to. Fire and EMS are going to be responding because the lady may or may not actually be dead. He thinks he killed her. And you go through all of that. And yes, you get them there safe. You get them in the door. And then the next call you pick up is somebody's complaining because Burger King won't fix their order right. And that's kind of... And then on top of that, you never find out, did the woman actually die? Was she killed? I don't know.
Yeah, that's the aspect of dispatching that I've heard over and over again. Yeah. And even doing peer support is I can't even imagine that challenge of being on the other end, not being able to physically do anything about it. There's so much that's out of your control. and so much that's kind of unknown that your mind might be piecing together. And how is this going to go? What's really going on? How did it end? And our mind's trying to kind of piece all that together. That's a lot. And that's one of the things I've grown to recognize is there's so many first responders, police versus fire versus dispatch versus medics versus all of them, different aspects that may not understand some of the other parts of the jobs or have that understanding or respect for the positions that they're in. And dispatching is one that I've really grown in respect for the jobs, the difficulties and just the accumulation of it all. How was that challenging on your faith?
So, and that's the other part of this. There's the aspect of I need to do this job, but every day that I'm going in as a believer, knowing I'm a believer. How can I represent and be a testimony for Christ in this environment? When you're, and just for a frame of reference, early 2001 to 2004, it was just Peggy and I. And in 2004, Jana was born. So we started having, our family started growing. And so there was a family dynamic in that. And there's always the extra components of how do you handle what you're doing at work, all the stress. And then it's the same thing as everybody else deals with. I mean, lots and lots of stress early on trying to learn how to do this job. And I have a new wife and you're trying to do new marriage and all that can look very ugly. Not that we had any real problems. We didn't know how to process it. And there was nobody there to say, here's how you process it. To coach us and guide us through that. And then, yes, part of you is like, well, if I could ask somebody, do I ask for somebody? Or is that like, no, because then people think, well, you can't do this job, right? So there's those kind of emotions and thoughts that go through. And then you're just you're drowning in frustration and stress. And this is the early on. This is not even the later where you've got years now of mounting stress. You're like, there's multiple times where I would have the thought, why am I not doing better? I'm a Christian. Like, I'm saved. I should be able, and I'm watching people around me who I know are not saved, and they seem to be handling this so much better than I am. What's wrong with me? And so I spent, just to be honest, I spent most of my years in that position, and it's only by God's grace and his just generosity to me that there were times on especially midnight shifts where a lot easier to do that. You have more downtime, you're sitting around with your coworkers, and you have time for conversation. And I did have a few other Christians, and some were truly saved, and we would get in conversations about the Bible. Well, when you're in this close room, you may be able to be this close to other people over here doing their own thing, or you may be in the middle where all the radio channels are, and you're having this conversation, and other people are listening. They're not engaging in the conversation. They're just over there listening. And they might engage. They might ask a question or challenge you on something you're saying. So God did allow me to have conversations like that. And through one of those experiences, one of the dispatchers, she was actually one of my trainers who helped me get through, that was on our squad. My supervisor and I were both Christians, and so we would have conversations about the Bible and about God, and I just never knew she was listening. And she would sit over there and do her own thing and never ask any questions, never say anything. And when I did talk to her, super nice lady, never brought up God, never brought up religion, Bible. She just doing her own thing. And then one day she comes to work and she said, guess what I did last night? I'm like, what did you do last night? I prayed and asked Jesus to save me. And I was like, what? And all along she had been listening as we would discuss things about the Lord. So even though I wasn't directly encountering her with the gospel was encountering her through our conversations with my supervisor and I. That was certainly a highlight. God gave Peggy and I a year of discipling her, and to this day, she's still living for the Lord all these years later. And just, so it was exciting to see that. And it wasn't And it wasn't that I didn't have opportunities to bring up, or even like the people that I work with, they knew I was a Christian. If they said, where's Marcus on a Sunday when he's not off? They knew where I was at. I was in church probably teaching Sunday school, during Sunday school hour, but it really was hard to carry. But I knew a lot of stuff here that just didn't make it here. And so it was hard to live out what wasn't here. Like if you want to sit down and have a Bible conversation with me, I could have the Bible conversation with you. But when the crisis moments hit, I didn't know how to process what was here to here, not because I didn't want it to move there. I just didn't know how. Am I supposed to make this happen? The Holy Spirit makes this happen, right? How does this happen so that I can show the people around me, hey, if you have Jesus in your life, you can do this job. It could be a lot easier.
Yeah.
That was not the case.
Yeah. And I know for me, the knowledge was there, but for so much of my life, it was going through the motions, having the knowledge, but not knowing how to live it out. And for me, it was a lack of surrender. I mean, it was identity in everything else, in the world, in my job, and what I do, and my success, and everything else, and then wanting to add church, add God, add that to my life rather than me living mission first for God. These jobs just pay a toll. The evil, the darkness, the stress, the trauma that you're absorbed in all that, and then not knowing how to live out faith, where we are mind, body, and soul, and maybe there's more recognition for the trauma and the mind and the ways that we're impacted on the job and the physical aspects of stress on our body and all that, but so little awareness to how to combat the injuries to our soul and faith and where hope can be found, and how to live that out on the job and for it not to be separated from. This was an awesome conversation. I know we're just scratching the surface. Thank you, Marcus, for everything that you shared so far. I know there's still so much more to your story. I hope you'll come back to listen to the rest of Marcus's story. You're not going to want to miss it. And if you liked this episode, comment, subscribe, share it with others. You can find us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, stay encouraged, be bold, and keep living mission first for Christ.